In the previous movie, I showed you how to enable depth of field blur for a camera, and also how to edit the focus distance and interactively watch the focal plane line in, say, the top view of the camera. However, there's a couple of ways of automating this process. One we showed you earlier. I'm going to double-click the camera to open up its settings. You can lock the focus distance to zoom. That means the focal plane will always equal the length of your camera lens. It's set by millimeters or whatever parameter you want to use here in the camera settings dialog, or zoom can be set by the number of pixels here in the timeline panel. But as of After Effects CS5.5, there's a couple more options. I'm going to turn off lock to zoom. As long as you have a 2-node camera, where you have the back of the camera and a point of interest, and you are in After Effects CS5.5 or later, you can selectively focus on specific layers. Let's say, for example, that I want this layer to be in focus for the camera's current position. I'm going to select that layer, Shift select the camera so both the target layer and the camera are both selected, go up to the Layer menu and choose the new command Camera Set Focus Distance to Layer. This will allow After Effects to automatically calculate the distance between the camera and that layer and set the focal plane right at that layer's center, or its anchor point. Now this is just a fixed value. As you get closer or further away, that layer can still fall in and out of focus. And to enhance the depth of field blur effect, I'm going to increase the blur level to 200% of its normal response. In other words, twice as sensitive as a real camera would be. And now you can really see how layers go in and out of focus as that focal plane moves through the composition. I'm here at the end of the composition, and this final layer is obviously my hero. Let's say that I want that layer to always be in focus, no matter where the camera is along its flight path. Well, to do that, again, I select that layer, Shift select the camera. I can do it in the comp panel or down here in the layer panel, and use Layer, Camera, Link Focus Distance to Layer. Rather than being a set once command, which set focus is, Link Focus writes an expression, a little bit of JavaScript code for the focus distance parameter that will constantly recalculate how far away it is from the layer you chose. Again, you need to have a 2-node camera, and you need to be in After Effects CS5.5 or later to get this command. I'll select this item. You'll notice that that layer immediately becomes sharp, and you'll see that the focus distance value has turned red. And even if I try to scrub it, it's going to return to that value. If I twirl it down, I'll see that an expression has been written for this layer that automatically keeps it in focus. You don't need to understand that expression. You just need to know that the red value means it's being controlled by an expression. Expressions are the subject of a later lesson, but you can always turn expressions temporarily off and on by clicking on this equal parameter to disable and re-enable expressions. Now, as the camera moves through this flight path in this composition, you'll notice that this repeat symbol at the very end stays in focus. As I fly through these different musical symbols, they go out of focus as they get closer to the camera, or in other words, further away from the focal plane. And you'll notice over in this display, that focal plane stays locked on that layer's position. And therefore, it stays in focus. One other option you have is to lock the focus to your point of interest. That gives you an animatable target of where you want your focus to be throughout your composition. In this case, I'm going to deselect all and select just the camera, not another layer, and use the command Layer, Camera, Link Focus Distance to Point of Interest. It's warning me that I've already set one expression to do this. It needs to create a brand new expression that's going to overwrite the previous one. And that's okay. I'll click OK. You'll see now that my focal plane line has jumped to my point of interest. If I move my point of interest, the focal plane line moves with me. And as I animate through this composition, it stays locked on that point. Now, depth of field blur existed in After Effects since the very beginning of 3D space. Unfortunately, it tended to have very poor blur quality, like you see here. One of the major differences in After Effects CS5.5 and later is now you have a lot more control and a lot more parameters to determine exactly how that blur looks. And that's the subject of the next movie.